the ATRIUM Association running the cultural route. And the ATRIUM cultural route works to disseminate knowledge about the architecture and history of the 20th century, with a focus on totalitarian and dictatorial regimes. So Patrick and Lorena will tell us about the educational project that explore architecture as an instrument of fascism, and that use built heritage to teach difficult histories. So Lorena and Patrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. So first of all, it's at the end of the day, it's difficult to follow guitars, Lego and football, I think, but I should do my best. It's something a little bit more serious. Just let me say, I've been delighted to be here. I've learned an enormous lot. We work in informal education, informal looks at history, so it's really rather different than to some of the things which were presented particularly yesterday, but I hope it will be useful or interesting for you. So we're a cultural route of the Council of Europe, and just to say one or two things, I really shouldn't say this, but because I don't represent the cultural routes, but I am one of them, and we are one of them. The Cultural Routes program was begun, I believe, in 1987 with the Santiago de Compostela, and they look at ways in which you can move around Europe and discover its history and culture in a sort of bottom-up perspective. And these are some of the routes which you can see, the Santiago, the Hansa, Viking route, etc. We represent ATRIUM. I'll tell you a little bit about this, but I should also say that we have to, in order to be certified by the Council of Europe, we have to follow certain sorts of criteria. So some people think of the cultural route as a sort of tourist route, but it is really a cultural and educational route. And those are the criteria which we have to follow. And I've highlighted there cultural and educational exchanges for young people, so informal ways of learning about European culture and history, and also the promotion of the values of the Council of Europe. So those perhaps are two key ones. Also perhaps just mention the last one, the involvement of creative industries and contemporary cultural activities, which is very cogent to the sound in silence which was being presented this morning. But ATRIUM, what is ATRIUM? ATRIUM stands for the Architecture of Totalitarian Regimes in Europe's Urban Memory. And I'll try to give you an explanation of what that is in a minute, but I'd just like to first of all focus on the fact that it is very much transnational. I was going to say pan-European, if only it was pan-European. At the moment we have members who are mostly municipalities, but universities and research centres can also join in 7 different countries. So in Italy, Croatia, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, Greece and Poland, Krakow, which has just joined the route. But what is ATRIUM, and where does it start? I should say it's a route which deals with difficult history. In that sense, it's really quite different from many of the cultural routes which are basically celebratory. It works on a difficult and dissonant aspect of the past, and perhaps I'm going to try to explain that with 2 or 3 examples of members. I'd like to talk first of all about Forlì. I am, as you may notice, British, but I live in Italy. I've always lived my working life in Italy, and I live and work in the University of Bologna in Forlì. Forlì is a very particular city in Italy. It was known as the Città del Duce, the city of Mussolini, because it was reconstructed in the 1920s and 1930s. It's basically quite a typical late Renaissance and medieval town, but Mussolini moved the Bari centre, the axis of this city, east and built a new part of the city, which you can see a little bit on the right-hand side of your screen there. He did this, why? Well, because he was born in Predappio, which you may have heard of, as a small town near Forlì, and he grew up in Forlì, went to school in Forlì, and spent some of his youth in Forlì. So Forlì was meant to be a sort of showcase for fascism. It was the sort of model town to show what fascism could do. And they built a large station, a monumental station, and a large street which had schools, sports complexes, and an aeronautical college at the end. The aeronautical college was a college which was meant to train technicians and pilots for the new airport. The new airport, the first airport, in fact, in Emilia-Romagna. So it has a very, very strong impact of fascism within that city. Partly then, I think we have the new part of the city, which used to be called Viale Mussolini. And of course, after the war changed, it became Viale della Libertà, the freedom walk. But it also has particularly dissonant and difficult and delicate artistic production. For example, on the right, on your left-hand side there, we have the mosaics which tell about the history of flight. And they're quite interesting from an aesthetic point of view, but they're absolutely part of a fascist propaganda move. It quotes, for example, Mussolini's entry into war in 1940, etc. So you have a very difficult history to work with there. In that sense, we see it as, in a sense, a dissonant history, because it's a history which is around us in the city, but which was quite often neglected or repressed, really, in terms of its meaning. So we like to talk about the architecture, evaluate the architecture and the urban development of a city like Forlì, but also, obviously, in a critical and historical manner. So the ATRIUM route began, really, from Forlì. ATRIUM is the international headquarters. But I'd just like to give you a couple of other examples of city members, because we work not only just with fascism, but any non-democratic or totalitarian regimes and the ways that these regimes impacted upon cities. And I'm aware of the fact that totalitarian is a difficult and contested term as well, so we tend to say totalitarian or non-democratic. One example might be Dimitrovgrad. It was a founder member of ATRIUM in 2014. We've now got 10 years of certification. Dimitrovgrad, as you can imagine, comes from Dimitrov, the Bulgarian Communist Party leader. In a small area of eastern Bulgaria, a chemical plant, a large, huge chemical plant was started, and to administer and to give residential areas to the workers and management in Dimitrovgrad. The town was built from scratch. So it's, again, a town with an interesting architectural and urban history, very much linked to, of course, a regime which is no longer recognized as being a legitimate regime. It's something which citizens in Bulgaria, of course, take their distance from. Another example might be quite a similar story, really. Stei in Romania. I'm aware that there's some Romanians in the room, so I hope I said the right thing. Stei is a very small town in the middle of Romania. And it's interesting because in 1947, I believe, uranium was discovered in the hills outside Stei. And the Soviet army actually moved into Stei, moved into the area, constructed the mine, and similarly constructed a sort of model town in order to service the miners and the workers, the management in the area. It was mined until, I think, the 1950s or early 1960s, so the mine is now closed, but the city is still there. So the citizens have a sort of relic from a totalitarian past, and a dissonant, difficult one to handle and to look at. And what the citizens of Stei and the mayor have been trying to do is to give a sort of value to the architectural aspects, the functional aspects of the town, but keep in mind also that problem, because it represents a sort of totalitarian past. Those are three examples from members, but just to say, I think, picking up on what Jean-Philippe was saying this morning, how much memory you can find in so many different places. We find going around Europe, either with our members or also with projects, how many cities in Italy in particular, because of course the fascist regime lasted 20 years, but in many other places, in Germany, in Spain, in Portugal, in Poland, and lots of Eastern European countries, the extent of that particular heritage, the extent of that built heritage which you can find on the streets of our cities. And just two examples to give you, to strengthen that, one is Buzluja monument, which many people may have seen, built by the Bulgarian Communist Party as a sort of summer headquarters in the 1980s, and then abandoned after 89-90. And there's now a foundation in Buzluja which is trying to maintain that structure in order also to use it not only as a sort of interesting architectural element, but also to keep that sort of dissonant and difficult memory of the communist past. So it's not a past which we want to erase, because erasing the past really doesn't enable us to look at the past and think about the past in a constructive way. So it's a difficult area, and it's a difficult area also in terms, I think, of the management of that area. But just one other example. Again, we work with Buzluja on European projects, but they're not actually a member. Kazanlak is not a member of the ATRIUM Association as yet. But one other example might be this amazing, which I haven't seen actually, Nazi summer residence in Reugen, the island in the Baltic, where there's the Prora town, which has an enormous summer residence, which was built by the Nazi party in the late 1930s. And summer residences, of course, were also very much part of the fascist legacy and also some of the Eastern European legacy. So what do we do with that real estate? What happens to that real estate? Should it be converted? Should the traces of the memory remain? How do we interpret those traces? Is a problem which we really try to work with. And just before I go on to that, I should just try to explain again the sort of problem which we have in many respects, which is the fact that there's a cultural root. We're working with a heritage which is dissonant, which is difficult, with their tensions within it. There's some attempts, if you like, just to forget that the historical memory in those places, or see the historical memory simply in aesthetic terms. We try to keep those two things in tension with a very much a critical historical and dissonant view of the relationship of that heritage with the present. And I find it particularly interesting because many heritage studies talks about continuity, really finding in the past things which we can now see in the present and celebrate. This is instead a relationship with the past which is difficult and dissonant. It's not quite the same, of course, as sites of memory, where there's a particular division between the present and the past, and a negation and a rejection of the past. This is more the using and recognizing of some of the architectural, functional, aesthetic elements of some of the aspects of totalitarian regimes and what they've left in our cities. Having said that, we feel it very necessary, and I think it's necessary here as well, to make our intent absolutely clear. The intent is not a re-evaluation, it's not to give any positive meaning to the legacy of the totalitarian regimes, not the idea, that fascism did some nice things, fascism did some good things, but to use that critical historical perspective always, really, when we talk about it. Partly that's guaranteed by the Council of Europe, I may say, because we follow, of course, the Council of Europe's orientation in terms of human rights and democracy, but also we found it necessary in Article 2 to make quite clear that in no way and in no case and in no way does the association accept expressions and forms of historical revisionism, etc. And we find that's necessary, really, to say that. And these, if you look at our website and see some of the areas which we work on, the idea of restoration, new uses, abandoned architecture, propaganda, buildings relating to health, for example, educational buildings and industrial buildings. But I will finish just with a closing comment before giving the floor to my colleague Lorena, with a pair of boots. I like to quote this because it was an economic historian in Britain who at the end of his career was asked, well, what is the most important tool for an economic historian? And everybody thought something in the idea of cliometrics or econometrics, etc. And he said, a good pair of boots. In other words, to be able to get out of the classroom, go and visit cities, go and visit agricultural areas as well, and use that sort of experiential learning in order to rediscover some of the things which re-semanticize perhaps some of the places which we can see in our cities. Cities, in other words, and citizens who don't regard aspects of their city as having a meaning, a historical meaning, or meaning in terms of historical memory, can rediscover that memory in terms of using this particular sort of approach, which is, again, very much linked to the Faro Convention approach, which asks local citizens to get involved in their heritage. And I was just thinking this morning, the citation of the Stolperstein, the stumbling blocks, I think also has that sort of function. It's something where the extraordinary sort of leaps out at you by mistake from the ordinary. Just as you're walking along the street, you suddenly realize that there's something which trips you up. And I think that might be a sort of way of interpreting the things which we do. So again, we're back to locality, and if I could like to hand over to Lorena, who will talk about a specific action of ATRIUM within Torviscosa. And I've lost that completely now. Oh, yeah.
Okay. Good afternoon to everybody. My name is Lorena Zuccolo. I come from Italy, from a small town in Italian small town, which is called Torviscosa. And I'm going to tell you something about a small project, a small town, so a small project, maybe much smaller of the ones we heard in these days by you. The project is entitled Architecture as Propaganda, the Display of Power in the Totalitarian Regimes of the 20th Century. Torviscosa is a member of ATRIUM, as a part of the route. Okay, here we are. The project was promoted by a local association whose aim is to the cultural promotion of Torviscosa, and hopefully also the tourist promotion of Torviscosa. And ATRIUM is a partner of the project. I'm a member of both these associations, and so in addition of being the promoter of the project, I am also the link between the two associations. The second partner is a scholastic institute of the area of Torviscosa. Let's say the students from Torviscosa, most of them go to this institution, which includes different kinds of schools, of high schools. So literature, high schools, technical, economic, languages, and so on. The project has also gained the economic support of the region where Torviscosa is located, that is Friuli Venezia Giulia. It is on the northeastern part of Italy, between Austria and Slovenia. The idea behind the project is from local to global, as I have written, because the idea is to use the history and the architecture of Torviscosa to talk about totalitarian regimes in Europe and architecture from these regimes in generally. Yeah, please. Yeah, just a few words about Torviscosa. Torviscosa is a new town, we say, in Italy. That means one of those towns that arose in Italy during the fascist period, and whose foundation is linked to the general themes of the period. I mean, the agrarian reform based on land reclamations, the economic policy of autarky, the industrial progress. A lot of new towns arose in that period, and they are considered as a tangible achievement of fascism. Torviscosa is also a company town because it was built by a very big and important company of that period, Viscosa. And I guess you have already noticed the similarity of the name of the village and the name of the company. Viscosa built a very big industrial plant, and close to the plant also the village. The plant was really very big, and it employed thousands of people in the decades. So the company had a very heavy influence on the community, of the cultural fabric of the community, of the economy, of course, but also on the social fabric and cultural fabric of the community. And it is interesting also to the history of Torviscosa is interesting also to understand something about the relationship between the companies, the industrial companies in Italy, and the fascism. In this case, for example, even if the village was built by a private company that could do whatever they wanted, they decided to follow the architectural models that the fascism was suggesting. We are in the second half of the 30s. That means when fascism became imperialist, and also architecture followed this ideology. let's say, moving away from the rationalism of the previous years towards a mode that we call monumentalism, because the fascist government wanted to show how powerful it was. Yes. But let's go back to the project. The project has got an objective that is the same of ATRIUM, that is to make young people, especially young people, to reflect on the regimes, to know something about the architecture of totalitarian regimes, but in order to reflect on the regimes that produced this kind of architecture. And has got two main outcomes. The first one is to let students in Torviscosa to know something about their own town, but also about the other members of ATRIUM, the other towns belonging to the cultural route. And the second outcome is to create the two new products, new materials about Torviscosa, starting from the materials that ATRIUM or other members of ATRIUM produced in the last years. Also, these materials, of course, they must be intended to let young people know something about this town. The activities planned for the first result are, first of all, the analysis of the materials produced by ATRIUM and the other locations, the other ATRIUM locations, and also the visit to some of these localities. Especially 3 of them are quite close to Torviscosa, so it will be quite easy for us to go there. One is Tresigallo, which is Italian, is in Italy. The other 2, living in Russia, are now in Croatia, but they used to be part of Italy at the time of their foundation, so till the end of the Second World War. After the war, they entered Yugoslavia, and so now they have both the fascist buildings of their foundation and the communist the buildings of the communist period. The second result, the activities planned to achieve the second result, that's the production of different products. The presence of different types of school is a benefit, is an advantage in this case, because we are going to ask every school or each group in each school to take care of the material that is more suitable to them. For example, literary and history students will write the text for the videos or for the leaflets. The new technology students will record and edit the videos. The mechatronics students will construct some buildings with 3D printers. And maybe the nicer, the most interesting material, most interesting for them, for the students, would be the production of we call an itinerant performance. Students will be helped by a professional copywriter, and they are going to write a sort of storytelling, on which storytelling they will create a sort of audio guide. They will be also, in this audio guide, in this storytelling, it will include also some individual memories, so students are going to talk with the people, especially 2 or 3 very old people in Torviscosa, who can tell them about their life, the life in Torviscosa. And the performance, the audio guide will be used afterwards by visitors in Torviscosa, and the audio guide will tell the people where to go or what to see, of course, but people will be also asked to act something, to do something. For example, the audio guide will make questions like I don't know, I'm just inventing now. We haven't done it yet, but questions like, do you think that this fascist building will be destroyed or not? If you do think that it will be destroyed, maybe sit down, and if you don't, stand up or do something like that. We asked another association to help us in this. They already done some of these kind of performances. I participated in 2 of them, and they are really engaging. So I'm sure they will be appreciated by other students that could come to Torviscosa to visit it. Thank you.
Comment to conclude, which is, I think, in the nature of the cultural route, is the exchanges between our members. So we're really trying to construct a sort of commonality or similitude, if you like, on a European scale, which again is one of the objectives of the cultural routes.
Thank you so much, Lorena and Patrick, for this presentation. I am obliged to look at the time as well, so we started a bit later, and in order not to penalize the workshop afterwards, I think we'll cut a little bit from the break before the dinner, and we'll still have we'll take 2-3 reactions from the room if you have questions or comments for the presentation on ATRIUM. So, yes, please.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm curious how your members and the sites you mentioned, how you tackle this issue. And I'm speaking specifically with reference to Buzluđa in Bulgaria. I'm Bulgarian and familiar with the story and the significance of the monument. So how do you manage this challenge of a lot of this architecture being so striking, as the example of Buzluđa, and having that fascination and attracting visitors? So how do you bring this educational aspect so you really tell the story and reach to more people? Because I think there's a real risk that the external value, the striking architecture, apologies for repeating myself, kind of stands out, and the rest is not really told. So how these stories really emerge. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. It's absolutely spot on the issues which we have, the problems which we have, if you like. It's not neutral. It's it's delicate and we say dissonant in terms of the relationship with it, which is why we everything which we do really follows the Council of Europe and our own statute. But to work on actually the issue of fascination of the buildings, I think, is particularly important. Also because unless we can get to know, unless we can recognize some of the functional or aesthetic power of regimes, then there's something which we're not understanding about the regimes. There is a sort of fascination and power which you have to take on and understand in order to also to be able to critically and historically challenge that. So it is a very delicate operation, I agree, but I think the institutional background is very important. I think the initial presentations are important. The fact that we need to keep that historical aspect very much in focus, but it's also a way in which we can deal with or look at some of the sorts of aesthetic and indeed industrial force of a totalitarian regime. Because one aspect is that aesthetic aspect of fascination, but another is simply economic development. And of course, there is a reason. There's a reason why totalitarian regimes can go on, because they do satisfy some of the economic requirements of the populace, and of the people. So that you have to recognise that that's in a sense what a regime is giving to people, while it's at the same time taking away its democracy.
Yes, Raul.
Thank you for this. This sounds really interesting. You've mentioned the sort of your focus on the similarities between different types of dictatorships, and you touched upon, Patrick, upon the totalitarianism being a charged word. And I'm wondering, how do you distinguish, if at all, in the cultural roots between different types of dictatorships, between fascist dictatorship and socialist dictatorship in terms of their architectural representation, also because their position with regards to power and propaganda was kind of different. And fascist architecture was supposed to serve a certain vision of power. Socialist architecture was supposed to, at least in theory, at least in their minds, was supposed to be something completely different, much more democratic, much more of the people rather than of a specific regime.
Thanks for that as well. I was always rather sceptical, in fact, about the similarity in terms of the architecture in particular. I think one of the elements which we've learned working with socialist towns in the east of Europe is that there's much more an aspect of urban development, which is important. So urban development, which is linked to, as I said before, industrialization or modernization, if we might call it that. So I've seen and there's a tension there. So obviously there are, I think, similarities and commonalities, but there are quite clearly, obviously, differences in every situation, also within Italy, I think, as well. So that needs to be kept in mind as well. Thanks.
Okay, last comment or question, Suzanne.
It is a question. You know that in Ethiopia, Mussolini also built Asmara. And this project, of course, you cannot include in your project Asmara itself. But maybe it would be interesting for that, what you told about Torviscosa, to compare. Because I have the feeling that in Asmara, in Ethiopia, the Bauhaus innovation, the architectural innovation for Fiat that Mussolini presented was much stronger than it did in Torviscosa. This is more conventional, even if it's very modernist style. And my question is if you think that it could be possible to put into the material, when you think about your example, to put for comparison also Asmara together and to compare. Thank you.
Well, the project started with some introductory lessons made by experts. So they talked about the totalitarian regimes, but also the dictatorship and the differences between the two systems. And of course, they talk also. They also said something about other new towns or other creations, fascist productions around the world. I think in Forlì, some years ago, the Forlì municipality organized a very nice exhibition also on the colonies, let's say, on the architecture of the colonies. And so maybe we can use. And as Patrick has just said, it is for us, we are just a very small town, a very small community, so it is really important to share our experiences and what we have done, what the others have done. And so, yeah, maybe I think it is a nice idea. Also to go there would be a nice idea, but we don't have enough money. But okay, yeah.
So just a comment, very brief comment on that as well. I mean, one of the things we're sort of feeding into is this whole area of contested legacies, contested colonial legacies, which is, of course, very strong in Britain and in France and in Belgium and Holland at the moment. And we're actually involved in a project on the traces of colonialism within European cities. So it's obviously something we don't want to close and restrict either to architecture or urban development, but to be able to dialogue with those sorts of difficult, dissonant European pasts.
Okay, we are obliged to stop here with this session. Thank you again to both of you, and congratulations. Yes, I will just take some seconds of your time to again direct you towards the workshop rooms. So those that